I love ya, Kansas State. Mark Rogers TV knocking out every Power 5 conference schedule in college football. And those Wildcats, you're playing Auburn. That's all I got to say about this schedule. You are playing Auburn. And in addition to that, your athletic director a couple weeks ago was tweeting with the athletic director at Mississippi State. And you said, let's play a home and home. And you guys, within about 5 tweets, got it done. That's the way you schedule in college football. You're a Power 5 conference team that continually, consistently goes to bowl games, and most of the time actually goes to really good bowl games, BCS bowl games, and you're Kansas State, and you're underappreciated season after season. You're not ranked in the top 25. When you are ranked in the top 25, you're ranked typically about 10 or 15 spots where you end up. Kansas State's not elite. I'm not saying they're an elite program, but they overachieve consistently. They're always undervalued. And Bill Snyder's done an exceptional job twice there in Manhattan. And so Kansas State is realizing the situation. We've got a college football playoff. We're not going to make it every year, but we want to be knocking on the door fairly consistently. And to do that, well, the SEC is considered the best, may or may not be the best. I believe it's the best right now. I believe the gap is much smaller than most people think, but I believe that the SEC is the best. That aside, it's all about perception, right? It's about results being interpreted and perceived. It's perception. Kansas State, the SEC is the best. We're going to play the SEC. Scheduling's difficult because everybody's out there trying to grab opponents and have their own agendas. But Kansas State went out and said, hey, Auburn, come to town. We'll play Auburn. And now we're going to play Mississippi State home and home. I don't know if they've got Auburn on the road. I would think that if Auburn's going to Manhattan, Kansas, that there's a return trip coming in the future. That's what I would think. So I applaud Kansas State for understanding we've got to beat the big boys, non-conference, to gain some respect. Before that, it's Stephen F. Austin. Then after Auburn, they play UTEP, Texas El Paso. So there's only 3 non-conference games for Kansas State. And playing Auburn says it all. That's enough for me. Again, only 3 non-conference games for the Big 12. Therefore, I'm good with a one huge non-conference game. Now, if this game was against Purdue or against Illinois or against Kentucky, you know what, Kansas State? You would have to add somebody else to balance it out. Add another mid-tier or lower-tier Power 5 conference team. But it's Auburn. So you beat up on Stephen F. Austin and UTEP. Hopefully it doesn't happen to Kansas State like it did last year against a subdivision team against North Dakota State, I believe, the last second field goal loss. But it still turned out to be a good season for the Wildcats in defeating Michigan and going 9-4. All right, so they go 2-1 non-conference. Hey, maybe they steal a victory. Auburn's having issues right now, and the game's in Kansas. All right, the non-conference slate, really the only thing to break down here in the Big 12, home and away. So Kansas State's got 1, 2, 3, 4 on the road. So they are one of the fortunate ones this season to play 5 at home, 4 on the road. I hope that the Big 12 has analyzed this to try to balance it out. For those teams that have to play 5 on the road, that they play the better teams at home. Let's see how it shakes out for the Wildcats here. They open up Big 10 or Big 12 play against 4 or 5 really good teams here, because they get the early date against Iowa State. Okay, that's sandwiched into the non-conference on September 6th. They go to Iowa State, of course, have to win that game against probably the second worst team in the Big 12. Then they jump back into conference play the first week of October against Texas Tech at home. Then they go to Oklahoma. Then they play Texas. Then they play Oklahoma State at home. So they've got 3 of those 4 very difficult games: Texas Tech, Oklahoma, Texas, and Oklahoma State at home. Got to win 3 out of 4. Then they go to TCU and West Virginia. Got to win those games. Play Kansas at home. That should be a layup. Then they've got the game against Baylor in Waco. So they've got to show up in Waco at 7-1 most likely, unless it becomes a free-for-all. But based on how Oklahoma's projected and based on how Baylor's projected, most likely Kansas State's got to show up in Waco at 6. I want to say 6-1, but it's 7-1. Again, a 9-game conference season. They've got to show up in Waco at 7-1 to have a shot at the conference championship. Can they do it? Of course, they can do it. The odds say that they won't. They'll probably go 6-3 conference. 6-3 conference, and that's even going to be a pretty good showing. So 6-3 conference, they lose to Auburn, they go 8-4. That's the projection on Kansas State football. I think the ceiling's 10-2. I think the basement's fairly low. Not that Kansas State's not a solid team, but when you play Texas Tech, Oklahoma, Texas, and Oklahoma State consecutively, and toss in TCU, and then finish up with Baylor, if they go 2-1 non-conference, they could slip into that 4-5 range and barely get to a bowl game at 6-6. But I'm going to say 8-4 for Kansas State, and I know I'm not delivering predictions on all these schedules, but hey, when it lays out like that, I think the percentages say Kansas State's an 8-4 football team here in 2014. Would love to hear from Wildcat fans on this underappreciated program year in, year out that shows up and plays the big boys, and I love the Auburn game and Mississippi State home and home coming up in a few years. Right here, let's talk about it on Mark Rogers TV.